My name is Raimy Ruben. I am the content director for CauseMatch, and I thank you all for joining me today. Before I dive in earnest, wanted to go over a couple of housekeeping items with you. Number one is this is being recorded, so you should receive the recording to this meeting later this week. So just know that in advance as we dive in. And number two is that I am going to do my best to monitor the chat and look for any hands that are raised as we go through this. However, I am not a very good multitasker. So I ask for your patience as we go through this, and my promise, my commitment to you is that there will be time for question and answer at the end here, and I will put up my contact information so that we can continue the conversation afterward. Please just know I don't view this as the beginning of a conversation, as a one-off conversation, but I would love to continue this as we move forward. So either at the end of this presentation, or I'll put up my contact information, and I would really look forward to hearing from you, your questions, comments, and suggestions moving forward. One of the reasons why I want to hear from you about this is because I love this topic. I love this topic. Over the last couple of years since I've worked with CauseMatch, I've really made a study out of what inspires people to give. I love understanding how we as fundraisers can sort of pull the right levers, push the right buttons to inspire people to give at all, and inspire people who are giving to give larger donations. Part of what we offer here at CauseMatch are those creative services. So over the last couple of years, I've crafted messaging for over 500 organizations to inspire people to give. And this is really the part of the job that I love, the donor psychology of it all, and understanding why people give away their hard-earned money to worthy organizations like yours. So thank you again for being here, and looking forward to exploring this topic with you today. I would like to cover 5 things over the course of our time together today. The first is the basic psychology behind fundraising writing. This is the mindset that we need to have. And the reason why this is the first thing and the most important thing in a lot of ways is because everything will fall into place after this. If we have the right mindset when we dive into our fundraising, then all of these other elements fall into place really, really nicely. Number 2 that we're going to go into is how we're going to hook our audience in right away. What is the narrative structure that we can provide for people to draw them into our story and hook them from the beginning? The third thing we're going to cover is we're going to keep it emotional. We're going to try and understand both the why it's important to keep it emotional and how to keep it emotional throughout our fundraising messaging. Number 4, we're going to talk about the common mistakes and how to avoid them. This is where we're going to see a lot of the theory and practice. I will tell you the exact steps that I take to avoid some of the common mistakes and to make sure that we're hitting all of those notes, hooking the reader in from the start and keeping it emotional as I craft my fundraising messaging. And the last thing that we're going to cover is how to use images effectively, how to use video correctly in our fundraising message, because it all stems from that same headline that we're going to jump in right away to, that first thing we're going to cover, the mindset that we need to have to fundraise effectively. So that's what we're going to cover today. We're going to start, however, with the psychology behind fundraising writing. This is the mindset that we need to have to really do this effectively. If I could boil down my entire strategy into one sentence, it would be this. I want donors to feel awesome about giving to your organization. When they donate, they should be filled with that warm glow, with that amazing feeling like they just did something fantastic by giving to your organization. And if we can really, really internalize that this is the goal of what we're trying to accomplish here, then again, everything else is going to fall into place. We want donors to feel awesome about giving to your organization. If I could boil it down to 2 sentences, if you let me have 2 sentences, I would say the second one is that we have to earn our donor support over and over and over again. We cannot just expect people to give to our organization, even if they've given to us in the past. We really need to earn their support over and over and over again. And I would say that this is especially true for donors that have given once to our organization. This is where we tend to see the biggest drop off from that first gift to the second gift. So even if a donor is given to your organization for years and years and years, and especially if they've given only once, we have to do our best to earn their support over and over and over again. Everything we talk about from here on out for the next 20 minutes or so is going to lead to these two sentences, that we want donors to feel awesome about their gift, and we want to earn their support over and over and over again. We can talk a little bit about when fundraising does work, but sometimes it's easier to talk about when fundraising does not work. When I'm crafting messaging for fundraising, these are the things that I try and avoid. Number one is I don't want to be flowery at all. I want to be simple, straight to the point. I want people to understand what we're trying to convey right away without using complex or complicated language. People have very short attention spans, and they're going to get distracted or just give up if we try and make our message too erudite, too complicated, too flowery. Number two is I try and stay away from kitsch or poetry. I want to draw a connection as tightly as possible between donors and the service recipients that they're helping. So I don't want to get lost in analogies or metaphors or poems that may be beautiful and may be wonderful, but they're not they're not connecting the donor as closely as possible to the people that they're helping. That's really going to be our sweet spot. How can we make them feel like they are helping people directly without using poems or kitsch at all? Number three is we don't want to use too many statistics in our writing. One of the themes that you're going to hear over and over again over the course of this presentation is that we want to stay on the emotional side of things. And statistics have a way of flipping the switch in our brain to make us think more analytically, which is the opposite of emotionally. We want to appeal to people's hearts and not with their heads. So we're going to try and stay away from statistics as much as we can. We want to stay away from jargon. This is not the place to talk about your mission statement, your vision statement. Those places tend to be full of jargon. I saw a great quote the other day, which was that when there was a copywriter who likes to write and always thinks about their grandmother when they write, because that means that the language is going to be really, really accessible, because the person's grandmother doesn't understand any of the business jargon. And that sort of forces him to write accessibly and simply. We want to stay away from the jargon and make the language as accessible as possible. And lastly, this is not the right time to educate your donors about all of the amazing work that you do, or the new program that you just tackled, or whatever it is. I hear a lot of fundraisers talk about educating their donors, and that is a different aim than inspiring their donors to give. Remember, if we're going to keep making donors feel awesome at the forefront of what we're trying to accomplish, then educating them falls into a different category. And it's very difficult, dare I say even impossible, to try and accomplish both, to both educate the donor and inspire them at the same time. We really want to stick to the emotional and inspire people to give without educating them about the programs that we have or the expanded mission that we've tackled. This applies to everything. I talk a lot about writing because that's where my role in the company is, but the truth is that it extends far beyond that. In-person fundraising, speeches, no matter what we do when we're crafting fundraising messaging, all of the principles that we're going to talk about here today apply to all of the different mediums, both in-person or virtual. Just wanted to keep that clear as well. So that is the basic mindset that we need to really dive into fundraising and craft effective messaging. I went through just now some of the things that we should not do. So let's talk about some of the things that we should do. What should we do? How do we hook our audience right from the start? Well, I will say this. When I craft messaging, I don't just ask people to give money to an organization. I'm not asking them to give to a campaign. What I am asking them to do is to solve a problem. I want donors to feel like they are solving a problem. So we have to structure our message and say, here is the problem, here is the solution, and here is the call to action that allows us to solve the problem. So just to give you an example, I was working with an organization the other day that helps survivors of human trafficking, right? So the problem was that you have all of these people, these survivors of human trafficking, that are trying to turn their advocacy efforts into business opportunities. But they kept getting stymied. There are so many obstacles, and there are people who are trying to re-victimize them after all of the terrible trauma that they endured. That is a problem that donors can wrap their arms around. To take it in a different direction, and maybe not something quite as harrowing, is that I'm going to pick on you, Howie, who's the executive director of my synagogue growing up in Pittsburgh. So what is a problem that a synagogue can talk about? We can talk about the fact that there are people throughout the community that are looking to plug in. People are looking to find meaning in their life, to connect to spirituality. They're looking for a community that they can celebrate with in times of joy or mourn in times of sadness. But there are people in our geographic radius, in our community, who are looking to plug in and find inspiration. That is, again, once again, a problem that donors can wrap their arms around. And once we've laid out the problem for people, we can lay out what the solution is, which is that we can absolutely connect these survivors of human trafficking with the business experts that are going to allow them to build businesses and produce those advocacy efforts and turn their stories into advocacy. We can absolutely solve the problem. We can absolutely grow this community and welcome more people into it so that they are finding lives of meaning. They are finding lives of purpose. They are joining this community where they can celebrate and mourn in times of sadness. We can absolutely solve the problem. And once we've laid out what the solution is, then we can issue the call to action, which is that we cannot do this unless you open up your heart and donate. But if you stick to this arc of problem, solution, call to action, then you're making sure that you're structuring the narrative and bringing the reader in and saying that there is a problem that only you can solve by donating. That is the structure that we want to craft for donors. The other element of this, the other thing that I do when I write, is I write this sentence out almost every time I'm crafting messaging. You are reading this because you ... And I write the end of this sentence. And I would encourage you to do the same thing. Even if you're not planning on using this exact sentence in your messaging. And sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't use it. But even when I don't use it, I still include this. I still write it. I still write it out as sort of a guide for myself as I continue to structure the messaging. You are reading this because you care about the plight of survivors of human trafficking. You care about building a community where people are built on spirituality, where people find meaning or inspiration in their lives. The end of this sentence is going to be what my colleague Benny Marilis calls the why of the campaign. This is the reason that your organization exists, the reason why your campaign is so important. Whatever the end of this sentence is the unifier that's going to bring together everyone who's involved in this campaign. You are reading this because you care about, you believe in, you understand that. And that the end of that sentence is going to be the guide that can help you throughout the rest of your message for the campaign. So if we structure with problem, solution, call to action, and we find this values statement right here, the why of the campaign, then those two things can be our shining light for the rest of our message. The third thing we're going to talk about is keeping it emotional. There is a lot of fascinating research out there about how the emotional side of our brain is a much more philanthropic, generous side of the brain than the analytic side. People will give more if we appeal to their emotions, as opposed to the analytic side. We want to stay on the emotional side as much as possible. So what does that mean in practice? The very first thing that it means is that we have to talk about you a lot. And in this case, I don't mean you, the organization, I mean you, the reader, the donor. We want to, again, if what we're trying to do is make donors feel awesome about their gift, we have to insert donors into the story. We have to make this just as much about them as it is about the organization and as it is about the people that you serve. So we want to make this all about you. One of the tricks that I play in my head when I'm sitting down to write is what I essentially do is take all of the credit that organizational leaders like yourself deserve. Take all of the credit that you deserve, and I transfer it to donors. So I tell them that when you donate, it is as if you are the ones who are empowering survivors of human trafficking. It is as if you are the one who's building this community for people to be in touch with their spirituality. You are the person who gets the credit for this, because they do. It's not disingenuous. By donating to the campaign, they absolutely deserve a share of that credit. But what we can do is tie them as directly as possible to service recipients if we make it all about them and essentially give them all of the credit that you, the organizational leaders, deserve for the campaign. The other trick, the other ways to make this as emotional as possible is to focus on one individual. So if we think about our human trafficking example, it's really the default. It's simple to talk about the masses and to talk about the plight of survivors of human trafficking, right? But it's much more emotional. We can pull on the heartstrings if we talk about the individual, the person who has escaped the depths of hell, person who has ran away from people who are trying to torture her, who were torturing her, and now have established this new life and are trying to set up these advocacy efforts and just keep getting blocked at every turn. All of a sudden, when we're talking about the individual and not the masses, the story comes to life and it pulls on the heartstrings a little bit more than it otherwise would. So we want to focus on the individual, not so much the masses, but focus on the individual. The second thing that we can do to really bring the story to life and make this emotional is to talk about photographable impact. And this can be very challenging. So we can talk about empowering survivors of human trafficking. We can talk about building a community of people who are trying to be inspired and live lives of meaning and purpose. We can talk about that community member. But those descriptions of the community member, you can't take a picture of what empowerment looks like. You can't really take a picture of someone who is living a life of meaning, right? So we could use those phrases, and I absolutely do, but we want to peel back the layers as well and talk about the photographable impact of what it looks like for someone to be empowered when they're in this situation, right? So that may mean sitting down with a lawyer and looking over a contract to make sure that she's not being taken advantage of by someone. That may mean for a synagogue, that may mean praying next to someone and feeling at home in a synagogue for the first time in his or her entire life. We can really paint a picture for donors so that they can literally picture it in their brain. This is what impact looks like. When I give my donation, this is the picture that we are heading towards, that my donation is enabling, that photographable impact, not talking about it in the esoteric, but talking about it in a real, tangible, vivid way. The last thing that we can do to bring it to life is give it a sense of urgency. We as humans are very good at procrastinating, and we will find every reason to delay a decision. Yeah, this cause is important, but I can give next week, I can give next month, I can give next year. So make sure that when we're crafting our fundraising message, it's important to add that sense of urgency and really explain why, not just that the cause is important, but it's important to give today. That sense of urgency is going to sort of defeat the procrastination in our brains and going to push us to donate today. Here's where we get to see a lot of this in action. We're going to talk about 4 mistakes that I've seen a lot and how to avoid them. These, again, are the exact tools and tips that I use for myself to make sure that I don't fall into these same pitfalls that I feel like are the default setting, right? Some of this is a little bit counterintuitive, at least to me before I learned it. So these are the guardrails I put in place to make sure that I am avoiding them or fixing them if I fall into them. Number 1 is I see a lot of organizations that are making their message way too complicated. And this speaks to one of the first things that we went over in this presentation, which is the jargony language, right? The complicated, complex language. We're making our donors think too much and they can't understand our message and they burn calories trying to understand what we're trying to say and they give up and they click onto something else. So what do I do to make sure that I'm not falling into that? I use a grade checker. There are a million of these online. I happen to really like Hemingway app, but I run my copy, I copy and paste it into a grade checker. And this allows me to see what level of writing my writing is at. So in this case, I copied and pasted something from a newspaper article. So you see it's a grade 10, 10th grade level. When I write, I try and get it down to at very least a 7th grade level. And if I'm feeling super ambitious, I'll say a 6th grade level to make sure that the writing is really simple. And that means that anyone can jump onto an email or jump onto a website or jump onto a WhatsApp message even and understands immediately what we're trying to convey. The reason that I like Hemingway app, and again, there are a lot of them out there, so I haven't done a full study of all of them out there, but the reason that I like Hemingway app is because of this purple box at the bottom here, right? So 4 out of 15 sentences are very hard to read. This tells you exactly which sentences are the problematic sentences when you write. And that sort of takes the thinking out of it. You don't have to be an English major, you don't have to be a great writer to use this to know where your problem sentences are. A lot of times the fix is also quite simple, that you take really long sentences and you shorten them into 2 or into 3 sometimes. You take really long words and you shorten them into simpler words. This will make sure that you're not using that jargon, that you're not using very statistical language, that you're not using poetry to write, that you're writing, that your message is to the point, simple, easy to understand as quickly as possible. That is problem number one and solution number one that I employ. Mistake number two that I see is that organizations talk a lot about themselves. They talk a lot about themselves and they're not putting the donor in the center of the story. I saw this great quote just last week by a fantastic fundraiser, Chris Davenport. And he wrote, "She is not one of your donors, you are one of her charities." And to me, that was a great way to flip that mindset and say, to your average donor, they don't feel like they're one of the many people in your database. They feel like you are one of the many organizations that they give their money to. And we have to put ourselves in their shoes in order to do a good job of fundraising. So how do we quit talking about ourselves and start talking more about the donor? Well, we count. We count. It's pretty simple. When I write, I count how many times I've used the word you, your, what that version of the word you, and I count how many times I've used the word we or the name of the organization. There should be many, many more yous than we's. Many more yous than we's. And the beauty of this is that it's really easy to take you sentences and turn them into we sentences. So this is from this screenshot I have is from an organization called Project Extreme, which helps at-risk youth. So when they submitted this copy to me, I'm going to pull out one sentence here. It said something like, "Here at Project Extreme, we show young souls that we will not give up on them. Not now, not ever." All we did is we took that same sentence, mostly the same words, and we flipped it. And we did that thing where we give donors the credit. We changed it to, "When you donate, you show another young soul that you will not give up on her. Not now, not ever." We took that we sentence, we made it a you sentence. And in that way, we're making it all about the donor and less about the organization. The donor is the hero of the story, not the organization. So mistake number two, solution number two. Mistake number three that I see is very often organizations subtly convince donors not to give because they spend a lot of their message telling donors how great they are. And I think that the reason is that they assume that people want to be a part of a winning team. Right? If we just tell people all of the major accomplishments that we've had over the last year, people are going to want a share of that success and be a part of it. And I get that impulse, I really do. If we come back to what the main mindset, the psychology behind great fundraising is, how do we make donors feel awesome? We're going to go in a different direction. We're not going to talk about the past success of the organization. Instead, we're going to talk about the future impact that a donor can have by donating. So in this example, I wrote, "Naomi won't get the help she so richly deserves unless you open up your heart and donate today." When I first started doing this, I would have written that sentence in past tense. Our organization has helped Naomi, so she has the help that she so richly deserves. But knowing what I know now, I can take that sentence and flip it so it's future focused. Naomi won't get the help she so richly deserves unless you open up your heart and donate today. I know that your organizations have had a ton of successes and have helped loads of people, and that's amazing. We want to, again, put donors in the driver's seat, give them the credit, and tell them about the future impact they're going to have by donating now. We're going to make them feel awesome about their gifts by telling them about all the people they will help in the future. So that's mistake number three and solution number three. The last mistake I want to talk about is that we think that we're a nuisance to donors. We come into this conversation thinking that we're annoying our donors by asking them for money. And I think that when organizations don't do fundraising correctly, they are. When they're talking about themselves and talking about their past success, and it's not about the donor, that is probably annoying to many donors. But if we continue to tell our donors that they are heroes for giving to our organizations, we're not a nuisance. You're just flattering the donor who doesn't want to be flattered. You're giving them the opportunity to solve that problem, to make the world better in a tangible, real, photographable way. You're using every opportunity to tell the donor that he or she is a hero. And in that way, you're removing that annoyance. You're making it awesome to be a part of this community and to feel great. You're giving them that warm glow, and no one will be turned away from that. No one will be turned off by that. So that is mistake number 4 and solution number 4 that I employ. The last thing that I want to cover in this webinar today is I want to talk about using images and video effectively. And the reason that I do, the reason why I want to talk about this is I want to show you that it continues to be an extension of the same things that we've been talking about. So even if there are things that we did not cover in this webinar, there are so many elements that go into a strong fundraising campaign. You can always think back to the main framework, the main mindset that we're going to employ, and there will be answers that come from that. So I want to talk about using images and video effectively to show you that it's the exact same principles that apply. Let's look at a really strong fundraising image. This is an amazing fundraising image in my mind. I've seen this used in a fundraising campaign before. I grabbed it from there. It's a great fundraising image. Why is it such a good fundraising image? Number one, it's about one person. There's one person depicted here. It's not a group shot. Number two, that direct eye contact forms the emotional connection that we've been talking about. It feels like if I turn away from this person, if I do not give to this organization, it feels like I am not giving to this child. I am turning away from this child. That emotional connection is really, really strong from a fundraising perspective. And the third thing, it's a little bit more subtle in this picture, is that the story is clear. And the story is going to be the exact same story that you're telling in the fundraising. There is a problem that I could solve by donating. I don't know exactly what the problem is without reading the text or without knowing what's going on, but one thing is clear, this child is in pain, this child is in anguish, and my donation is going to alleviate that pain. It's going to alleviate that anguish. So there's clarity, there's a simplicity about this picture that makes it a really strong fundraising image. Now let's talk about what happens when we don't follow these rules, right? So what makes this a poor fundraising image? The exact converse, the exact inverse of all of those things. It's a group shot. So my focus is everywhere. I don't know which person to pay attention to. And in that way, there is no emotional connection being made. There is no emotional connection being made between me and the subjects of the photograph. The last thing that I want to say about this picture is that the story is not abundantly clear. I don't know exactly what's happening in this picture. It's a little bit of a confusing picture. There are a couple of parents in it, a couple of children. I don't know exactly what's happening in the picture. So the simplicity, the clarity is not there. The thing that I look for the most, that I'm going to understand in the blink of an eye, literally what's happening in this picture, that's not there. Just want to go on one quick tangent, one short anecdote about this that I really like that brings out the point very nicely. About a year or so ago, I was working on a lot of campaigns all at once. I was over my head in how many campaigns I was working on, and they were all sort of bleeding into one another. And an organization sends me a picture and says, is this a good fundraising image? And the picture was of a man in a suit handing a disheveled looking person a brown paper bag. And I didn't even see who the sender of the email was. I didn't see which organization it was. And I was working on so many that it wasn't inherently obvious to me which organization sent me the picture. And my immediate thought by looking at the picture was that I was looking at a drug deal. Shows you where my head is at. I saw a picture of a man in a suit handing a brown paper bag to what looked like a junkie. I quickly looked at who the sender was, and I saw that it was a food pantry, and the person was handing someone what peanut butter and jelly sandwich for a PB&J drive that they were doing. But that was not abundantly clear to me as someone who was coming in from total left field into what the organization was doing. So I bring that up because you all have the curse of knowledge in terms of what your organizations do. You know more about your organizations than anyone ever will. And you just have to make sure when you're crafting your messaging, when you're using a picture, that you're not making any assumptions that you don't even realize that you're making, that it is painfully clear to someone who is outside of this, who doesn't have that curse of knowledge, what the story you're trying to tell is. The last slide that I want to go over with you is using video. And once again, it's the same rules that apply. However, I've seen way too often that organizations try and repurpose videos and do a whole lot in one. I think it's because videos are so expensive to make that they want to get a good bang for their buck. So they figure if they have a really good gala dinner video or they have a really good promotional video for their organization, they can use it for fundraising. And I hope that it's clear at this point that those purposes of a gala dinner celebrating a year of achievements or a promotional video that you're doing, that great recruitment efforts are not the same thing. They're not telling the same story as a good fundraising video, right? A good fundraising video is going to give donors a problem to solve. It's not going to talk about all of the successes of the organization. It's still going to tell that story of that one individual so we can really bring out the pain points that individuals feel before they come into your organization. that photographical impact videos are a great place to go into a little bit more detail and talk about the real impact that happens when someone steps into your organization because of a donor's gift. You're able to give it that sense of urgency. You're able to be repetitive so that you're hammering home whatever that controlling idea is. And most important of all is you can issue that call to action. If you're using a video for fundraising, you have to include in it that the reason for the video is for people to open up their heart and donate. And in that way, you can make them feel absolutely awesome about their gifts. So let's make sure we covered everything we set out to cover today. We talked about the psychology behind fundraising writing, which is that you want donors to feel absolutely awesome about their gifts. We're going to hook them from the start by structuring our message with problem, solution, call to action. We're going to keep it emotional by inserting readers into the story, by making it about you, about donors as much as possible. We're going to avoid common mistakes by using a grade checker, by counting the we's versus you's, by putting our stories in future tense and not talking about past impact, and by knowing that we're not a nuisance to donors when we're telling them how awesome they are and that they are heroes. And lastly, when we use images and video, we're going to follow these same rules. We're going to tell that powerful story, give donors that problem to solve, and make them feel awesome about their gifts. I believe I told you at the very beginning of this presentation that I would put up my contact information. So let me end with that.